Welcome to Mariana's Press, and we are joined with NMI delegate Kimberlyn King-Hinds. This interview is on Zoom because I'm currently on Guam for work, so thank you for accommodating me, delegate. Appreciate it.
Anytime, anytime.
And so we've been keeping up with you, through your posts on social media and your newsletter, and you've since taken some of your very first official actions, filing your first bill, making your first vote. So, what can you share about some of the first official actions you've been taking?
Well, first, I want to say that some of these things that we're taking action on has been on the table for some time, right? A lot of work has been put into it by our former delegate, and basically, it's just carrying the football and pushing through, and hopefully, we can get some traction in a Republican administration. In light of just these conversations about workforce development and making sure that we have sustainability as it relates to workforce, right? I thought that that was an important bill to get back on on the agenda. Um, in the next week or so, we're dropping another bill, which is to ask that we be included in the Essential Air Service program. That's critical, basically, to lowering costs of inter-island transportation and just creating new opportunities for commerce, right, by reduced airfare. And so it's been busy, aside and separate from dropping those bills, the committee work is pretty intense. There are days when I'm running from one building to the next because, there's multiple hearings in different buildings and just keeping up the work with that. Aside and separate from that, Tomas, the work continues in terms of knocking on different doors and talking to every single member that I can about our economy and how we need, you know, some of these policies to be changed so that we can have these tools to be economically self-sustainable. Because given the climate in Washington, D.C. now, where everybody's focused on lowering the deficit, right? And making policy reforms to make sure that America can live up to its obligations with regards to some of these mandatory spending, like Social Security, for example, right? You know, how do we empower ourselves, right, to be able to ensure that amidst these cuts, we have a pathway moving forward.
And I did want to ask you just about some current events. I know you've commented on them, but for the purposes of the interview, and so our audience can also get caught up. So there was this proposal from the governor, which has been, I think, already a year old, about a $400 million, using $400 million from FPUA and FPUC. I mean, I understand there's debate out there about whether or not to call this a bailout. I know you use that term on the floor. So, I mean, what can you tell us about that effort and just the reality of what we're facing if we're essentially going to get another this $400 million?
I think, when we have this conversation, we need to take a step back and look at the process, right? And I don't know if this is public information, but sometime last year in early March, there was a letter by the administration to the Department of Labor requesting that these funds be repurposed. And that, the Department of Labor at that time basically said the authority for that has expired, which means there is no money to be repurposed, right? And so, you know, I support the governor's efforts to ensure that we uh, are able to continue providing basic government programs and services, right? Not just employment, but to be able to fund some of these operational requirements that our agencies are asking for, right? And it's my obligation to take his ask and make the ask in Washington, D.C. And I think where there's a point of contention is how do we go about doing that? And uh, you know, right now, when you're going to go in front of Congress, you're not asking for a reappropriation. You're asking for appropriation, a direct appropriation, right? And the question is going to be, why do you need the money, right? And if you're not very clear on what that ask is, the likelihood of you getting any of that money to begin with is very difficult. But, if we were to have a fighting chance, we need to be very clear on why we need that money, right? And one of the questions that we as a Commonwealth need to answer is, if we do not get that money, what will it mean to the services that are currently being provided for, right? Given the fact that if you're looking at the trends with regards to the arrivals, the number of businesses who are closing shop, right, reducing hours, and all that means to the CNMI's bottom line, right? We need to have an honest conversation about the state of our finances, and when we make this ask, you know, we have to be very clear. Can we survive without these funds? And by all accounts, from all that I'm hearing from different stakeholders within the community, to include members of our legislature, right, that nobody knows what next fiscal year is going to look like in terms of government revenues, and we need this bailout basically. So, uh, I don't want to get into an argument about semantics. What I do want to focus on is how do we clearly state why it is that we need that money. How do we plan to use it so that I can go now in front of Congress to effectively argue, right, on our behalf to get those funds to be able to support whatever it is that we're asking for.
So that's interesting. You haven't heard any like specific ask or outline in terms of how even $400 million would be spent. The administration hasn't provided that specific, those needs or lists.
So there was a broad general list, right? And one of the reasons why I use the word bailout is some of the ask basically is to cover the cost for the airport. And as we all know, the airport is going in front of the legislature asking for what, $11 million to be able to fund their operations next year. I'm hearing from the ports that, they're a couple of months away from running out of money, right? And we just heard that Jeju is down to one airline a day, and T-Way is only one, right? And obviously these flights are tied into to seasonal changes. Um, One of the asks is to cover cost of utility. One of the other asks is to reimburse the government for operational costs it has spent for the last 2 years, right? Because we haven't fully recovered from the pandemic, right? So, you're asking to be reimbursed for something that you've already spent, you know, and then a large chunk of that ask is also to make investments in the tourism industry, right? Which I know we all need. And so um, the thing is that when we go in front of Congress, we have to have a clear laid out plan, right? Can't just broadly generalize, you know, I need $500 million, you know what I mean, for X, Y, and Z, right? Like you need to clearly delineate really where that money is going to exactly. And that can only come with the fact that you've broken it down into a plan. You've identified basically how much you're going to allocate. For example, if you're going to say MBA, well, how much of that $100 million are you going to, you know what I mean? It's going to go into what? Marketing, promotion, uh, incentivizing airlines, right? Like it can't just be this broad generalization, because that's not how Congress works, right? And when you're dealing, you're working in a climate where you're talking to other representatives who represent districts where federal offices are closing down. Thousands of federal employees are being laid off, right, because of these broader conversations about the deficit. We have to be very articulate about what it is that we're asking for, and that can only come by having a very clear plan.
And I want to move on to another current issue that has also generated a lot of discussion and some pushback from, I guess, what you might call your political opposition, if you want to put it that way, about the China or bust narrative. So, Delegate, is it China or bust?
No, I mean, and the way that what is frustrating about this conversation, right, is what I'm saying is there's no food on the table, right? There's no food on the table, and I'm saying we need to go out and look at all our food sources. And the manner in which this conversation is being had is that the people are going hungry, there's no food on the table, but we're not going to eat chow mein, for a lack of better analogy, right? Uh, listen, we literally are stuck in this ad hominem, right? Where we, instead of focusing on what the issue is, and the issue is the economy, how is the government going to be able to pay for these services? How do we keep businesses from closing down? We're having an argument about the like or dislike about a particular market. I don't care. I've been very clear. I don't care where the tourists come from, right? All I'm saying is we have to explore all options on the table, right? The other part of this, right, is that you know, what's very interesting to me is, if you had a toothache, right, you're obviously going to go see a dentist, right? Because the dentist is who you're going to rely on. That's the subject matter expert. But it seems to me that the people who are loudest with regards to the conversations are not people who are experts in the business of having a business. And we're now turning to villainizing Hanmi and the chamber, which is very unfortunate, because I think these are the people who are the backbone of our economy, and the manner in which we have conversations should be driven by looking at how we can all work together, basically to ensure that they are able to stay here, to keep the doors open, so that we in turn can collect revenues to be able to fund the most basic of government operations, right? And that is the manner in which I want to have these conversations. And people are going to say whatever it is that they're going to say. I'm going to focus on trying to deliver the results that people are seeking, and what people are looking for is relief, right? Relief. Um, I wake up every morning when we have these conversations. You know what I worry about the most, Tomas? Honestly, who's at the forefront of my mind is, my mom, for example, and people like her whose primary income is their pension, right? You know, if pension gets cut by 25% because we can't afford to pay the 100%, right? Who's going to help my mom? You know what I mean? Who's going to have to cover up for that, right? Um, and people at the 100% are struggling, right? Because the cost of living is so high, and then you're going to cut 25%. I want to focus on how we keep paying them and generating revenue so that we can continue uh, meeting our obligations to them. And so that's what I'm here to do. And those are the conversations that I am going to focus on.
I just wanted to ask two quick follow-ups on this subject. There's
Mhm.
also been this, statement out there that there's nothing stopping charters. So, why not pursue that route if we're not even reaching, the cap that the exemption would exempt us from, right? Do you have a response to that? And the notion that we can do charters if we want to for China.
Well, I think that conversation has been had so many times, and you have the hotel associations and the different people within the business community who have talked about the difference between charters and scheduled flights, right? And how all that works. Um, and you know, when you do charters, right, you're basically putting the entire onus of bringing in those flights on the business community who are already dying. They're struggling. You have legacy businesses. I have, Tomas, honestly, I go home every night in Washington, D.C., and I talk to business people here in the community, and they're talking about closing shop, like people that we don't think or ever imagine that is a conversation, right, that they're having, right? And when you're talking about charter flights, you're basically now saying that if you are for example, Elon, right, that in order to be able to avail of that market, that they're now going to bear the cost of bringing in that that flight, right? And we 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 are arguing about the wrong things here. What we need to be focused on is how do we help each other out at a time when everybody is struggling, and be focused at looking at different options to be able to bring that relief.
And just one last question. I wanted to ask you how you see all of this on the backdrop of the presidency of Donald Trump. There's always articles out there that point out, you know, the competition and tension with China. So,
Yeah.
what's your response to those who say the geopolitics are just too hot right now? Why would they carve out any sort of exemption for us in the Pacific?
So you know what's very interesting is when we when during that last natural resources committee that I was on, right? And if people paid attention to what the chairman, Jeff, my friend Jeff Hurd, who's the chairman of that subcommittee, um, he explicitly came out and said that, I want to be able to draw a distinction between the People's Republic of China and the average ordinary citizen who lives in China, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that America engages, despite the geopolitics, with China for trade, right? And so people are very careful to draw those lines because everybody understands that, you know, yes, we do have geopolitics that is happening, and that's a serious concern. And America should be making those investments, whether it's promoting research and development to ensure that our technology, with regards to cybersecurity, is top of the line, and that we're beating China with those regards, right? Or building infrastructure that puts us in a that gives us a competitive advantage. Everybody's focused on that, but what you don't hear people talking about is stopping trade, right? And that's why you're seeing, for example, Hawaii, who's come out and is heavily pursuing the China market you know because of the amount of money that represents to that economy, right? Japan, who is our ally, right? Who lives who we share a backyard with, recently eased visa restrictions, right, to Chinese tourists. Because why? Well, in Japan, Korean is the number one arrival, followed by Chinese tourists, but they outspend uh, you know the Koreans 3 to 1, and so everybody's looking at an opportunity basically to bring money into their economy, and it should not be any different here. We're seeing it happen in California. We're seeing it happen in other states in terms of developing and promoting their tourism industry. And in these conversations, and in conversations with members of Congress, right? Um, a lot of them don't know, right, about, well, first of all, a lot of them still don't know where we're at, but a lot of them don't know how our economy works and how critically tied in the tourism industry is to sustaining our economy. And a lot of the questions that I'm hearing from my colleagues is that, well, why isn't this allowed? And I'm like, well, that's the question that I'm asking, right? If it's okay for Hawaii, if it's okay for California, where there are, more than a handful of bases, then why is it not good to be able to allow us to be self-sustainable so that we're not reliant on federal funds? What is the difference, right?
Right, and I saw your exchange with, I believe her name was Cleo Pascal from that think tank, and I know you released a statement on think tanks as well. Um,
Yeah.
and so let's move on, why don't we, to another topic about small business. So after our last interview, I had one of your constituents message me saying, can the delegate talk about small businesses? And I know you're on two subcommittees under the Small Business Committee, right?
I am. And so, being on that on these two committees, right, tells me a lot of things about the way that Congress works. And a lot of times what we see on TV are the partisan politics, right? But when you're having conversations in the House Small Business Committee, a lot of these initiatives are bipartisan, right? As a matter of fact, the last markup that we had, we had it was unanimous, right, in terms of advancing some of these legislations. And so a lot of these legislations have to do with, removing regulatory impediments um, so that these it'd be easier basically for businesses to avail of some of these loans that are provided for under the SBA. Some of these bills also, has a lot to do with making sure that there's actual oversight, and so that these funds are being spent um, in the right way, right? And so um, what I'm looking for, and I'm looking to hear, and what I would like to do is, have further engagement with our small business community to see, right, a listening tour to see, how what are their challenges with regards to some of these programs that are out there that are provided for under the SBA, right? And how can I be a better advocate in terms of changing some of these rules as it applies to the process out here. And I wish that there was more time this go around. I wasn't able to be here. I wanted to do this back in February, but I couldn't come back because of the IGIA. And then there's a time crunch this time around because I'm here for a short period of time. But in April, that's a conversation that I want to have with small business owners, and to just have a conversation about their interface with some of these programs, so that I can get a better sense of what the challenges are, and be a better advocate in terms of changing some of these policies so that it'd be easier for them when they go out to avail of these loans. But um, a lot of these issues are very bipartisan, and it's nice to be in, actually, right, when it's not very contentious and everybody agrees that there needs to be policy reform and regulatory burdens need to be removed, so that businesses the small businesses can have the support that they need.
And I notice on your social media, you've spoken up a lot about veterans issues. So I know there's several things you've been moving along on, but was there anything you wanted to share today?
Well, man, what is very clear with the VA, right? And I've spent this last couple months just reading all these different reports from the GAO and the IG, Inspector General, and I think this is where a lot of this consternation is coming from. Is that for so many years there's been a lot of studies and assessments and independent reports that have looked into the manner in which the VA is conducting its business, right? And I think that there's a bipartisan agreement that there's something that needs to change, right, in the manner in which the VA delivers some of these programs and services, because too many of our veterans basically are waiting too long to be able to avail of their benefits. The wait times are too long. And in our case, you know, we just don't have access, right? Like some of our mainland counterparts do. And so I'm very excited to be having lunch here in the next couple of days with the VFW, just to hear from them, right? What are you seeing? How are our veterans here? What are the challenges in terms of access to these programs? And obviously continue to advocate to be able to, extend, more of those opportunities so that folks don't have to travel.
And I know 902 talks have basically been reset with the new administration. Have you heard anything there? I think some might assume you'll especially have a more critical role given it's a Republican administration. So what can you tell us about 902 on your end?
Other than the governor's speech at the IGIA, I have not heard anything with regards to the 902 or 902 being resumed. I can tell you this. I'm not sure if the letter has gone out yet, but we are sending a letter. I'm sending a letter to Secretary Burgum, basically asking him to, get this interagency planning group going, right? Because a lot of these conversations, we keep having them over and over and over again. If you look at these, previous meetings with the IGIA, it's literally almost like a complaining session from the territories, right? And no action or no steps have been taken to actually address some of these concerns. And so, I'm focused on working, right? Like let's do this. Let's sit down, have a conversation. Let's have a plan, and get to the business of working on that plan. And but I'm sure that the governor is very eager to get that going as well. And I've stated to him that I'm here to help, right? And I'm here to assist him in any way. And my door is always open. As a matter of fact, when he was out there for the IGIA, you know, uh, I called him before the meeting, and then I subsequently met him at the IGIA. And my door remains open, and my commitment to working with him is 100%.
And I wanted to talk about some big picture items such as Trump's cuts and freezes. I know many of them are going through the court, as it does in government. We all saw it coming, right? That the courts would step in at some point. Is there anything that your constituents, the people of the CNMI, should know when it comes to some of those federal cuts? What Doge is doing? Just anything you've heard that might, maybe give some answers to people who are uncertain about some of the federal funds?
Man, the only thing that I can truthfully say is that we don't know, right? We don't know. We don't know because a lot of these things are going through the court system, right? But from just a big picture perspective, right? The struggle that Congress is having right now is, this growing deficit and this need basically to ensure that America is able to continue to meet its obligations when it comes to some of these mandatory spending, right, with regards to benefits. What I also do know is that there's a lot of focus and a lot of conversation about the need for accountability, right? And you sit in these rooms and you hear about some of these programs that are being funded, at a time when we're asking for funds, and you're like, well, why is that going to this random place for some random program, right? When, even that small amount of money, if we were to be given to the CNMI, could take us, could do amazing things for this community. And so um, that's what's happening right now. The debate basically is a deficit. What people can't agree on at this point in time is priorities, right? And how do you, um, address some of those priorities. And so, thankfully, we didn't have a government shutdown, uh, and that the work continues. But, there's going to be larger conversations coming up as Congress works on the reconciliation package.
All right, Congresswoman, that's all the questions I had. I know you have a few community engagements before you head out again to DC, but anything in closing you'd like to say just for, to update the community?
Yeah, what I want to come on here and emphasize, right, is that, you know, please look at this office as your office, right? This is your link to the federal government. And I know there's a lot of people who want to come and make appointments just, to just talk to me, right? But the staff here literally are trained to directly linked up with our federal counterparts, right? And if you're whatever issue it may be, whether it be labor or you are a grant recipient, you're an agency who is having issues with whatever drawdown, call our office. We're here. We are here to help. Um, we might not have the answer right away, but we will certainly do our best to figure it out with you and to be able to link up with DC, and try to resolve some of these issues. Other than that, when I'm here, don't feel like you have to make an appointment to come and visit. Just come on by, right? This is your office, and we're here to serve you. And I'm looking forward to heading down to Tinian because I haven't been down to Tinian since last year, uh, in the next couple of days. I'm also heading down to Rhoda to have, community engagements with the Manamku, the schools, and the business leaders down there to see how they're doing and to figure out how we can be better advocates. Same thing with Tinian, and we're doing the same thing out here. So just because we're not having, town hall meetings, it doesn't mean that we're not out there engaging and talking to people and just, doing these listening tours so that we can take all this information and amplify the concerns of this community in Washington, D.C. That's my job. My job is to be your ears in the ground there, to let you know what's going on and to take your concerns and be your champion there. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you all out on the streets.
All right. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. It's great to catch up with you. And thank you for joining us. You can get the latest headlines on marianaspress.com.